we wear more than just clothes. We also wear the global economy, public policy, or even trade politics that jointly make fashionable and also safe and affordable clothing available to hardworking families. Each year, the global fashion industry generates more than 4 trillion US dollars. And you can imagine how many economic and job opportunities that are associated or created by our sector.
Where do fast fashion garments sold to US consumers come from?
Fashion is possible because of international trade. When we talk about the process of making a garment, actually it can be far more complicated than we thought. Now, for example, just use the most simple product, t-shirt, right? It's such a simple product. But actually, to make into a t-shirt, we will first need to have cotton, the fiber, then have yarn, then have fabrics, then have the finished cut and sew process, and also the like the buttons or even the label. And each of these components can come from different countries. So the clothing can come from China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Mexico, Italy, and also USA, you name it. But that's not the end of the story. Actually, when we dig deep into the clothing, we find some additional very interesting phenomena. The label says it's made in Mexico, but using US fabrics. Or even made in Bangladesh. They say the fabric is imported. So this kind of phenomenon really reminds us apparel is more than just about the label made in, but actually it is made in the world, or multiple countries actually get involved in making the products, or we call it, it's made anywhere in the world and sold anywhere in the world. So now you can imagine how sophisticated the supply chain can be. Don't forget these non-manufacturing functions that are involved in making these products possible. We have a very vibrant and robust U.S. textile and apparel industry. We no longer make a lot of apparel here, but when you shop at a retail store, the clothing, even though it says it's sourced from Asia, but the idea of this clothing, the pattern, the design actually happened in the U.S. The clothing is licensed by a US-based company. It's a US brand, and we purchase it from a US-based retail store. So of course, all these functions create value, and they create very well-paid, decent jobs. 70 to 80% of the value of an imported garment, they're created in the US. We often say, oh, export create jobs, export support US jobs. But I want to say import can also support the US economy. Import can also create well-paid non-manufacturing jobs.
Why is fast fashion a global concern?
So we know, fast fashion really enjoying substantial growth over the past decades. And somehow I don't think it is too surprising because these fast fashion retailers really offer the products consumers want. Because of the expansion of the fast fashion phenomenon, there's some new global issue. One is labor. Apparel is a labor-intensive industry. We're talking about apparel, trade, and sourcing, but actually we're also talking about the people behind making of such products. One distinct feature of fast fashion product is they're cheap. As a consumers, we love to see more affordable products, but the question is if we got the product at such a low price, or if fast fashion retailers price such product at such a low price, how much these workers who are making such products can get paid? Are they fairly treated? I don't think any consumers would like to see somebody is risking their lives making clothing for us, or the working condition there really is below the bottom line. So this is how the growing of fast fashion really raised people's awareness of social responsibility. Issues like forced labor, child labor, they're becoming more and more visible these days because consumers, we care about these issues. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is the environmental impact of fast fashion. Fast fashion really create this kind of culture, really encourage consumers to keep purchasing new clothing. They want to offer fresh items, not even just every week, but even every day, every hour. They just psychologically give a lot of incentive for consumers to keep purchasing. But we should not forget about how to deal with these used clothing. Each year, I think at least millions of tons of used clothing was generated, just in the US alone. But the problem is most of them still have no perfect solution to be dealt with. The scale of textile recycling is still very small. The vast majority of used clothing, they have to be either be dumped or be burned. So they will create huge environmental impact, on our planet. Fast fashion products, they need to control their production cost. So one way to do that is to use relatively cheap textile materials. Such products will be even more challenging to be recycled after consumer just simply dump them or throw them away. These days, more and more countries, especially in Europe, they began to launch or to implement more restrictive environmental related regulations. And many of such regulations directly target the fast fashion industry. These movements push them to also to pay more attention to the labor or to the environmental impact of their business operation.
What role does the United States play in the global fast fashion industry?
People may not realize US remains the fourth largest textile exporter in the world. So here I'm talking about products like fiber, yarn, and fabrics, especially fiber and yarn. US remains one of the world's leading manufacturer and exporter. The reason is making such products is very capital and technology intensive. If you go to these factories, you seldom see people. Actually, they're all sophisticated machinery. Textile products don't have to be just about yarn and fabrics for apparel manufacturing purposes. They can be high-tech industrial textiles, medical textiles, or even PPE. During COVID, we need a lot of PPE, and they're actually textile products. So actually, US remains one of the world's leading producer and exporter of such products. And surely there are a lot of economic impact of the US textile sector, and also a lot of important and well-paid jobs be created by our sector. When we import apparel from Central America, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, or Mexico, very likely they will use US-made yarn and fabrics. So that's number one. Number two is US is one of the largest apparel consumption market in the world. And I have to say, apparel is a buyer-driven industry, meaning what products retailers will put on the sales floor or ask manufacturers to make really depends on what products we want. And this is a huge opportunity. Why? Because as I mentioned earlier, the fast fashion industry raised the issue of sustainability, raised the issue of the environmental impact. But what if, through better education, or when US consumers, they're more aware of these global implications of making and selling or even consuming fast fashion products. We want to see fashion companies pay more attention to this issue. So you have to show me how you treat your workers. You have to show me what is the specific or scientific-based environmental impact of making your products, how many carbon emission it's generated, how about the water usage, or do you have any plan to deal with textile waste? Or I really want to see some of the textile materials used in the garments, they're recycled. When US consumers, they're better educated, they're more aware of these bigger issues associated with the fast fashion industry, they can call for fashion brands and retailers to make some positive changes. And actually, I think this is happening. I often say, fashion companies, they're not just like a very abstract concept. They're composed of people. And our students will be future leaders for the fashion industry. I'm very impressed, working with them to see how passionate they feel about sustainability, how passionate they care about workers, their rights, how they're treated, and they want to really make the fashion industry or the world a better place to live. So I'm pretty confident when they become industry professionals, when they decide where to source their products or what kind of products they want to bring to the US store, some positive changes will be happening. So in the future, I'm sure we will see the supply chain become more sustainable, or the sourcing criteria will really give more emphasis on issues like sustainability and social responsibility.
What role does China play in the global fast fashion industry?
China remains the world's largest apparel producer and exporter. More than 1/3 of US apparel imports in quantity still came from China. If you're looking at, we know increasingly US companies, they source more products from Vietnam, from Bangladesh, from Cambodia, Pakistan, India, but also these countries, they're using more and more textile raw materials coming from China. China's role in the apparel supply chain is evolving, expanding from just being an apparel exporting countries to increasingly becoming a textile raw material supplier to many Asia-based apparel exporting countries. So surely China has a huge impact on the apparel sector. Furthermore, because of the growth of the China's economy and also, when Chinese consumer, they have more discretionary spending. So China itself is becoming a very important consumption market. Okay, if you visit China, especially these, tier one cities like Shanghai, Beijing, we can really see a lot of Western brands out there, including fast fashion brands. Because of more consumption of clothing there, the same issue that happened in many Western markets, that is how to treat textile waste, becoming more kind of serious concern in China. For some African countries, China is now becoming one of the leading source of used clothing. Okay, so you can really see, China's shifting role or more sophisticated impact on the apparel industry. China will continue creating opportunities and also challenges for the apparel sector. Countries like Bangladesh, Cambodia, how they can really leverage China to export more of their apparel products, right? How to really leverage China to achieve so-called trade-led economic growth. The environmental impact of apparel consumed in China down the road will also attract more attention or need more attention.
How can the US and China work together to address issues with the global fashion industry?
The US-China relationship, especially in the trade area, definitely have a lot of concerns. Well, that being said, despite the very challenging relationship, the stake remains very high. Each year, truly billions of dollars of textile and apparel trade happen between the two countries. And also, as I explained earlier, kind of both countries are expanding their role in the apparel supply chain. China being increasingly an important textile supplier to other countries, while China is also expanding its used clothing exports. So truly, I think the US-China textile and apparel trade itself, or the stability of the US-China textile and apparel trade, still matters a lot to both countries, and also definitely to a lot of workers behind this very sophisticated supply chain. I think both countries truly can contribute to many grand challenges facing our society. And these challenges don't require you have to choose a side to say, what kind of economic system you will like to adopt, because these issues are mankind challenges, things like climate change, how to really further reduce the environmental impact of making and consuming apparel products. We all care about the environment. We definitely want our future generations to suffer too many negative impact of our behavior, our activity. There's some potential area, even though they're a little bit more sensitive, but still it's great to at least have dialogue, have conversations, things like, the labor standards, because I think as human beings, nobody wants to see somebody else is risking their lives making clothing for us. We all want, the clothing sector to be an opportunity to generate well-paid and decent job, and that can lead to robust economic growth. We can do more to set some acceptable universal standards on social responsibility, on transparency, to ensure fashion companies or producers to share more data with the public to let us know about what's happening behind the making of the garment. I think there are a lot of opportunities. I would love to see the US-China textile and apparel trade continue to play a very important role, to be an opportunity for a lot of people getting involved in the supply chain, and of course benefit consumers as well.